Hi everyone, how's it going? This is Eden of Light Cycle Astrology. Welcome back to the channel, friends. Today, we are taking a look at the full moon that happens in the sign of Taurus this week, and which is also conjoined to the planet Uranus. So this is a very electric and exciting full moon, which is why I've labeled this Mantic Monday episode number 55, 3 likely narratives that may accompany this electric full moon. So we'll get into the narratives to watch for in just a moment. We'll also take a look briefly at the surrounding or supporting astrology that is leading up to the full moon this week. And then we'll take a look at the narratives to watch for. But before we get into all of that, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications. It helps the channel to grow. And you can also leave comments in the comment section if you feel so inclined to share. That is always really fascinating for me to see how you guys experience the astrology, and it's good for the community on the channel as well. You can always go to Light Cycle Astrology if you're interested in getting a reading from me as well. All right, well, let's go ahead now and take a look at the real-time clock and just briefly go through some of the supporting astrology that is setting up the full moon, which I think is going to help us understand what this full moon is speaking to. So on Monday here, we are going to be, we see that here is Mercury in Sagittarius beginning to form a square to Saturn in Pisces. Now, if I wasn't talking about the full moon this week, that's probably the thing that I would be focusing on is Mercury's aspects that it is making this week. First, we begin this square with Saturn, and then as that sort of fades out, Mercury then moves into an opposition with Jupiter. So Saturn is also stationing to turn direct this week. So we have a big story of the full moon is sort of going along or paralleling a lot of this Mercury, Saturn, Mercury, Jupiter kind of energy for sure this week. So that's one thing that will sort of dovetail into the full moon interpretation, because I think that's going to be part of the story for sure. Now on Thursday, let me just roll this forward a couple of days here. We are going to get Saturn stationing direct, which I just mentioned. The moon is also doing something important on Thursday. The moon is entering the sign of Taurus, which is the sign that it will culminate in. But one thing, actually, let me just bring the clock back just a few hours here. One thing that I think is really interesting is as we see the moon entering the sign of Taurus, I have the real-time clock set to the London location, by the way, just to make it centrally located for everybody, so you can convert off of that GMT London time here. But as the moon enters the sign of Taurus, the first thing it does is it makes this square aspect over to Mars in Leo. That's important. And we also see that the moon will, secondly, perfect or translate the light of Mars to Venus by trine. What does that mean? I hope I didn't just lose you in that. But there is this ancient astrology technique that talks about how the moon is a translator or a collector of light. So as the moon makes aspects to the other planets, the moon is sort of collecting up that light. If the moon has a store collection of, say, Mars energy that it makes contact to, it will deliver that light to the next planet that it hits by aspects. So we see that first, I mean, they're very close. Mars and Venus are very, very close. They're both in 3 degrees of their respective signs. But they're just slightly, by the time we actually see this perfecting, let's see, we move the moon to 3 degrees. It's going to perfect to Mars first by square and then to Venus second by trine. So all of this is, it boiled down, just simply means that the moon sort of takes the light of Mars and is communicating or delivering that light to Venus. That's important because we are looking at the full moon happening in both a Venus sign, but the sun, which is part of the full moon energy, is happening in a Mars sign. So we do see that Venus and Mars are sort of coming together through the transmission of the lights, the sun and the moon. Now, Leo and Capricorn don't normally see each other. They don't have visibility, those signs don't form any aspect with one another. So normally with Mars in Leo and Venus in Capricorn, you don't get the communication of those two planets. They're sort of on different pages. But we see the moon on Thursday moving into the sign of Taurus, sort of collecting up the light and connecting to Mars and taking Mars's light and delivering it to Venus. So there's kind of this communication that happens through the moon, which is important because the moon and the sun are both in Mars and Venus signs. So that is a part of the story for sure here. But it's an interesting way that there is a kind of reception. What that means is that there is a story that has a little bit more connectivity. So it isn't just that maybe this thing is happening in your life over here, and then simultaneous or parallel to that, this other thing is maybe going on. It seems like what we're looking at is that the two things somehow become connected or they communicate with one another. So when we're thinking about interpretations for this mundane full moon astrology, it's saying, hey, does this part of my life talk to this part? It appears so. And does that story sort of culminate as the full moon is perfected? So I think that that is what we're looking at in detail with this full moon here. Now, if we roll the real-time clock forward to Friday, we see that Mercury is sort of separating out by this point from the square to Saturn, but Mercury will begin to form an opposition to Jupiter, which is also a big part of the astrology story this week and something that we would be talking about if it wasn't for this full moon. But look, right around this time that this begins to happen, we also see that on Friday, the moon is going to move into that perfected opposition to the sun. That's the full moon moment. And it's very, very close to Uranus, right? So that whole story is kind of the interpretation that I would give it, namely that you're talking about Mercury contacting Saturn. Saturn is beginning to station and turn direct. So there may be this sort of story that is about, I wasn't sure if I should say this, or there was a kind of limitation on speech or on thought that somehow was, kind of there in the winds, which follows into a kind of, all of a sudden, maybe there's this Mercury-Jupiter opposition that is saying, I'm thinking a lot bigger. I'm thinking perhaps outside of the box. I'm ready to maybe make my case or my argument or my proclamation or something like that has this big Jupiter kind of reveal to it, right? Saturn is stationing to turn direct. And then look what happens. The full moon comes through and the moon is conjoined with Uranus, and it's all of a sudden very liberating in this very earthy kind of way. So I think that that is a big part of the story here. Let's get rid of the real-time clock here, and we'll expand on these three likely narratives that I think could be a part of this story. So the three likely narratives that may accompany this electric full moon. Number one, now this is, you guys are going to think I'm not serious about this, and in a way I'm just having fun with this, but has anybody ever heard the song? I don't know if it's actually written by Dana Lyons or he just performed it. I know it's a folk song, but the Cows with Guns song is something that I discovered one day, and then I thought it was hilarious, so I would play it for my son as he was a little bit younger. And my son, being an Aquarius rising, has a very natural propensity or like a streak towards the revolutionary kind of spirit, right? So he appreciates this song. Now, theme number one is sort of centered around this silly but also kind of serious theme of this cows got guns. Why? Well, it's a full moon in Taurus, the sign of the cow, right? And it's conjoined with Uranus, a god that is kind of a revolutionary god. So if you've ever heard this song, the song goes into how there's this one cow that is kind of like a neo in the Matrix kind of figure. He's like a revolutionary kind of guy that is going to break the mold. He's going to break, the zeitgeist in some way. He's going to come through. But first, his story is about he's trying to convince and communicate to the other cows, hey, there's a big conspiracy happening here. We aren't just, the farmer isn't just taking care of us because he loves us. There's a whole thing where they actually eat us. And the other cows go, oh, come on. That is ridiculous, right? So there's this whole conspiracy kind of thing. Now, the reason why I take this silliness seriously is because, number one, we do have the sun in Scorpio. The sun in Scorpio is going to be interested in those very dark, secretive kinds of things in our reality that other people don't always want to look at. Being a Scorpio sun myself, this is something that I'm very acutely aware of. I would prefer to skip the small talk and go right for the jugular in conversation. Hey, do you know about this or whatever? And that usually doesn't go over well. You have to sort of massage people into these deep, dark kinds of aspects of life. You can't just go in. But Scorpios love to just go in and do that, right? So we have a sun that is already kind of shining the light in the shadows, as it were, as the full moon is happening, right? And of course, the light of the sun is the thing that makes the moon full. It's reflecting that. So I think that that's really interesting. And then you have the moon culminating, becoming full, sort of giving birth or becoming ripe, representing things that might come to a culmination or a completion or an ending, as full moons typically represent. But it's doing so with the light of this knowledge or gnosis that the sun is shining onto it. And I think you don't even need Uranus in the mix to tell you that already that is sort of setting us up for a kind of revolutionary look at the darkness, or that things that maybe we don't always want to see or look at. And all of a sudden they become illuminated, and it has this real polarizing effect of, say, like shining the light in the darkness, but that which sort of clears the way for a kind of very earthy and life promoting rebalancing of something. So in the idea of cows with guns, eventually the song goes on to tell us that the cows eventually ante up, and they're fighting back in some way, and they're going for the promotion of their well-being and their life. So I think this cows with guns, with this whole conjoining Uranus, moon conjoining Uranus kind of theme or narrative, is running along with what do we maybe have to do? We have to look at the darkness. We have to look at the shadows. And there may be this narrative that is saying or is speaking to us, and it's saying something like, if you revolt, if you rebel, if you go against, if you shine the light on, if you communicate any of these troublesome or problematic or dark things, does that also lend itself to a kind of future that is promoting more life, right? Because the moon in Taurus is going to be about the kind of exalted fortune that is life promoting, right? The garden, as Taurus is often known as, sort of that abundance of spring. How do we get to that abundance of spring? By sort of maybe clearing at or looking at some of the darker things. So that's kind of a deeper narrative that may go along with it, that you may notice for the full moon. But take a listen to that song "Cows with Guns" by Dana Lyons, because or maybe it's Dana Lyons, but take a look at that song, because yes, it's silly, but I think it also gets at something really fundamentally deep that has this life and death kind of contrast to it, that holds like a lot of mystery and so on and so forth. So if you just want to get a laugh, and you want to look at it from the lighter side, which is also a part of this full moon too, we can just simply, with Scorpio full moons, you can simply have these narratives that are about what is heavier and what is lighter. Taurus full moon is going to want to celebrate. It's going to want to be a little bit like let's just ignore the darkness and the shadows because we're great. We're in paradise and we're having fun. Let's just enjoy that. Whereas the Scorpio full moon or the Scorpio sun is much more likely to say, yeah, but is it wise to ignore these darker things that may fester in the darkness and become more problematic? And so there's this tension in the full moon. So you can also see this playing out in friendships or relationships where maybe one person embodies that full moon that says, forget it. I don't want to hear about all this stuff. Let's just have fun and enjoy life. We don't need to worry about getting, changing our diet so that we're healthy or whatever like that. And there can be this tension and this back and forth between the lighter, more, I just want to live and enjoy stuff. Don't complicate my head with these darker ideas or these investigations. And so there can be that tension back and forth, either within us personally as we experience the full moon, or with other people or something like that. So that's something that is interesting. And you might just take a listen to this song if you want to get a chuckle. But anyway, that is narrative number one. Narrative number two, a celebration in high contrast. This one is, kind of similar, but this full moon, for me, one narrative that goes along with it, I think that a lot of us might experience, is something like when I used to travel to Thailand back and forth, and eventually I discovered this full moon party that was held on the island of Koh Phangan. It's in the it's sort of by where would you say, Koh Samui and stuff like that. But anyway, if you're familiar with Thailand, it's in the south. Thailand has a lot of islands in the south, and there is this world famous full moon party that is just mind blowing, and it is crazy cool. There's not everybody would like it because it's so packed and crowded with people that you can almost not walk. But for me, I sort of like the adventure and the way that you can get lost in a sea of people, and also kind of the sort of heightened or exhilarating feeling of that connection, having so many people all around you, which can actually turn, kind of in almost like a dangerous situation if the vibes devolve. When you're in a lot of people like that, if it's something like like a protest or something, and there's a lot of people, that's a dangerous situation. But if it's a full moon party, that's sort of this exaltation of heightened connection or connectivity with a lot of people, with the music, and you guys know what I'm talking about. But this full moon, for me, it really brings in that memory that I have of this full moon beach party on Koh Phangan. It's very beautiful. It has the ocean, of course, the full moon, the sand, music, dance, people, socialization, and it just brings in that really high contrast. It's dark and it's at night, but there's this bright full moon that's shining on the ocean, and it's exhilarating, it's exciting, it's liberating, it's revolutionary, and there's this high contrast. Maybe another example would be like at a club if they have a strobe light or something, but you have the sun in the sign of Scorpio, a sign that is one of the darkest moments of the year, right? It's very, very dark at the time of the sun's traveling through the sign of Scorpio. And you almost get this intensity with the sun in Scorpio that is strobed off of the full moon in Taurus. You get this kind of this high, intense contrast of light and dark. And of course, light and dark can represent different things for us. It can represent like intense beauty and intense ugliness. So like at the full moon party, for instance, you have about 100 people lining up along the surf to, all the guys are going pee. and it's really gross, and like, so you don't want to get in the water. But we're just in this moment of just heightened exhilaration and tension, and so there's like elements that are like, oh, that's really gross and it's sort of revolting, and then there are other elements that's really amazing and beautiful. So you can have this contrast of light and dark that is really extreme, especially with Uranus on this full moon, and it can be this representation of light and dark in these kind of extreme ways, whether that is meaning beauty and ugliness, or eroticism and like almost like a dark kind of passion that you're not sure if you should be careful of it or something like that. So maybe indulging in something that is both exciting and dangerous, like going to a full moon party, which could either crush you in a mob of like a stampede, or it could be the most exhilarating experience that liberates you and sets you free, and sends you on into the future with this this revitalized spirit that lends itself to a kind of revitalization, or like a re-energization or something like that. But you get that full moon in Taurus that is representing that life promotion, and you get the sun in Scorpio that is representing a kind of decay and death, and potentially like a purging or alleviating or cutting out of something, so that life can be sustained or rejuvenated or recycled in some way. The need for the sun in Scorpio is like, what elements of ourselves need to go through decomposition, so that down the road those decomposed things can be revitalized, which brings us back to the full moon. So that reflection of the light of the sun in the sign of Taurus, Taurus full moons are always going to have that narrative that is running along that kind of decomposition for the purpose of life promotion, and the culmination of that, which is going to be a very high contrast. But with Uranus in the mix, it's really like a lot more electric. It's like strobing lights, or something really exciting, or a stampede that's kind of dangerous but is also very celebratory, or something like that. So very exciting. So I think celebration is a good keyword. High contrast is a keyword for this full moon. All right. Now, the last one we are going to talk about, and of course all of these are related, is going to be this electric tension between body and mind. This is going to pull in some of the other astrology that we were looking at before we got into the narratives to watch for here. That whole play where we first see Mercury forming the square and going through the square with Saturn, Saturn turning direct, and then Mercury entering an oppositional aspect to Jupiter from the sign of Gemini, and or from the sign of Sagittarius, but over to Jupiter in Gemini. So you have Mercury in Jupiter's sign, you have Jupiter in Mercury's sign. So there's this mutual reception, but these two planets are, of course, in opposite signs to their own sign. And in ancient astrology, a lot of us know that that's a kind of detriment, or they call it a contrariety sometimes, where a planet can experience feeling as though they're in a very foreign place to their nature. So it's like if you are a bookworm, you're at a college rave or something, and it's something very different to what feels like your natural propensity. Or if you are a hardcore partier like Jupiter in Sagittarius, all of a sudden you are attending a dry lecture or something that it's not so philosophical. It's more like you're in an accounting course class or something. So these planets are mutually receiving each other, but they're doing so from a place where they're both in very opposite natural places to their own nature. So what that brings out in the full moon is that there's this very dynamic, but also very kind of revolutionary, a contraculture, contra-thinking, counterculture kind of way of thinking or understanding or becoming liberated or feeling as though like your mind has been lifted out of something in this real counterculture, counter-contra kind of way. So think about the progression of Mercury going through the square with Saturn and feeling limited for a brief time, or feeling like we can't say what we want to say, we can't think what we want to think, or maybe there's some reason why we're sort of limited in the speech or the thought, and then it enters this opposition with Jupiter, and all of a sudden it's like some kind of triumphant understanding or some kind of triumphant proclamation that we're saying, I will do this, or I do know that, or this is what I'm certain of, right? And as the full moon comes through and clicks into position, all of a sudden there's this very sensual, passionate full moon that's happening in Venus and Mars signs. So for me, you really get a kind of very mental process of like constriction and then tension of release, that is this cerebral or mental or informational kind of energy that moves very much into the somatic, the senses, the body, the passions, the fire, the gut instinct or the reaction, the kind of scorpionic, like deep instinctual need for survival and defense or protection that is paired with the moon's culmination in Venus's sign that is very sensual and also very indulgent in the things that bring pleasure at times, and wants to feel liberated with that conjunction to Uranus. So you see how there's this sort of mind-body shift as the week goes on, and maybe it's all tied in together where one thing sort of catalyzes another, but it feels very like there's informational or philosophical thing that leads into a very somatic, sensual, passionate, instinctual thing. So hopefully I articulated that in a way that makes sense, but a kind of electric tension between the body and the mind, I feel like, is happening. So if this one makes sense to you and is not too abstract for you guys to know what I'm talking about, and you experience something like this, I'd love to hear this in the comments, because that'd be really interesting to get like a tangible experience of like, oh, this, I see what you're saying, it tied in this way. And if I notice it too, I'll share with you guys on the next episode as well what I noticed about this one. But definitely more of a psychological one, but it's like psychology that leads into passion, or psychology that leads into instinct, or like a gut reaction or something like that, that seeks liberation, is what I would say is kind of descriptive of this one. So that is what I have for today. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll be back next week with another video, and I hope you guys have a great full moon, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.